U.S. President Donald Trump brings America First to Davos.
America is back and open for business.
How his message was received.
Well, I thought he was certainly very upbeat and encouraging other countries or companies in other countries to invest in the United States.
Today is Thursday, January 23rd, and this is The Issue from VOA.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori London.
And I'm Scott Walterman.
They say that there's light shining all over the world since the election, and even countries that we aren't particularly friendly with are happy because they understand what there is a future and how great the future will be. Under our leadership, America is back and open for business.
Speaking remotely from the White House, President Donald Trump delivered his first major global speech to global business and political leaders, meeting at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland.
Under the Trump administration, there will be no better place on earth to create jobs, build factories, or grow a company than right here in the good old USA.
He gave an incentive and a warning.
My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America, and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff.
And he also had a message for oil-producing nations.
And I'm also going to ask Saudi Arabia and OPEC to bring down the cost of oil. You got to bring it down, which frankly, I'm surprised they didn't do before the election. That didn't show a lot of love by them not doing it. I was a little surprised by that. If the price came down, the Russia-Ukraine war would end immediately. Right now, the price is high enough that war will continue. You got to bring down the oil price. You got to end that war. They should have done it long ago. They're very responsible, actually, to a certain extent for what's taking place. Millions of lives are being lost.
So, Lori, I watched the speech live, and I watched him give his speech, and I watched them cut away to the audience in Davos. And there's two main kinds of attendees at Davos. People who represent nations and the EU and politicians, right?
Right.
And then the other are the wealthy, the people that run the big giant corporations like Microsoft and Tesla and such. The people who run corporations seem to be very receptive to his message.
Well, let's get some perspective from an economist's point of view. Joining us to talk more about that is David Kass. He is a clinical professor of finance at the University of Maryland, Robert H. Smith School of Business. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us.
Yes, you're very welcome.
Overall, what was your general perspective on President Trump's first major speech to a global community when it comes to economics?
Well, I thought he was certainly very upbeat and encouraging other countries or companies in other countries to invest in the United States. There will be several regulatory advantages. For example, he mentioned a lower corporate income tax rate of just 15%. Right now, the corporate income tax in the U.S. For American companies is the statutory rate is 21%, which was reduced from 35% in 2017 in President Trump's first term. So he would even give preferential tax treatment to companies, foreign companies investing in the United States. So he was certainly trying to reach out in that regard. He was somewhat critical of the European regulatory structure with respect to the large tech companies, having singled them out for multi-billion-dollar fines along the lines of antitrust. And indeed, it would appear that the European regulatory apparatus with respect to antitrust is very aggressive with respect to the U.S. Tech companies. So I think he made an interesting point there. And in saying that, perhaps encouraging the European regulatory authorities in the near future to be less draconian in their decisions or analyses of various commercial arrangements from the large U.S. tech companies. But he certainly expresses dissatisfaction in that regard. And I think certainly the U.S. tech companies would share those feelings. So it sounded like he would certainly like to improve relations with Europe. He was critical of various value-added tax arrangements in Europe with respect to U.S. companies. He said something to the effect that U.S. auto companies can't sell their cars in Europe, but Europe can sell them here. Something to that effect. So being somewhat critical of some relative trade barriers in Europe relative to the U.S. I'm sure he's saying that in the sense of trying to improve future trade relationships between the U.S. and Europe, and perhaps his prior mention of tariffs, potential tariffs that would apply to Europe as well as China and other countries, could be used and are being used in a context of negotiation threat. I don't know what will be implemented in the future, but I think he is somewhat concerned of leveling the playing field from his point of view in terms of international trade between the U.S. and Europe.
That was the give and take between come here and make your stuff, I'll give you a tax break. Don't come here and make your stuff, and I'll tariff you.
Yes, that was pretty much exactly the message that he did communicate. And I think that was indeed pretty clear, and certainly encouraging as much investment in the U.S. as possible. And, I think one representative on the panel was at Santander, talking about investing $20 billion in the U.S., something of that, not $200 billion, but $20 billion. Already having and 20,000, whatever the number of employees here in the U.S., trying to say, hey, we're already there. But certainly there was sort of a carrot and stick message being sent. We'll give you the carrot benefits. You come here, you get a lower tax rate. And the stick part, if you don't come here, you just produce over there and then try to send it to the U.S., there'll be tariffs that'll be imposed on you. So both incentives and disincentives, let's say, being suggested.
There had been a lot of debate over the tariff issue that he has talked about. Economically, from an economic perspective, if countries don't or for whatever reason aren't able to make their products in America for whatever reason, and they do have to pay tariffs, what are the potential economic impacts on the U.S.? Will we take in more money? Will our prices go up? Because we've heard a lot of debate about that.
Yes. First of all, it certainly would depend on the magnitude of the tariffs. As percentage increases, I think 3% was the average tariff implemented during Trump's first administration, and now talk of 10 to 25%, something in that range being discussed now, the magnitude much higher and the consequences much greater. Certainly to the extent that tariffs are actually implemented, it's certainly a source of revenue for the Treasury, but it also will lead to higher prices. It should will result in inflation, and one could reasonably expect some retaliation on the other side, as from European countries or countries directly affected by the U.S. tariffs. And President Trump has made the comment that he wants to lower income taxes and offset the loss of revenue with tariffs. But he may be able to do that, but the tariffs, in effect, would be a form of sales tax. You may be reducing an income tax, but increasing a sales tax. And indeed, the sales tax part would probably be somewhat regressive. Those with lower income might be affected to a larger extent by an increase in prices resulting from tariffs. Most economists, not all, but most I think an overwhelming majority of economists would agree with what I've just said, that tariffs would very likely lead to inflation and slower economic growth as a result of the higher prices coming from it. So it depends on the magnitude of the tariffs, the extent that it's implemented. Again, if it's done on a very low level and it's targeting a couple of areas, targeted industries that may be, let's say, unfriendly to U.S. exports, it could have some positive impact. And certainly there are more revenues being raised by them. But I think most economists would discourage their general use or use at a fairly high level.
That's a short-term effect of tariffs, the higher prices. Is there a long-term benefit to tariffs?
It discourages international trade, which economists are all taught the benefits of international trade, comparative advantage. Certain countries can provide labor at low rates, others manufacturing technology. For instance, the U.S. is very strong in technology. Certain countries in Asia could provide lower cost labor. But long term, we don't really have much to go on except the 1930s. The Smoot-Hawley tariffs in the 1930s, most economic historians agree that it contributed to and extended the degree of the Great Depression of the 1930s. It does reduce trade. And I believe over time, consumers and countries would be worse off.
Turning to another topic that he brought up, which was oil production, he said he plans to ask Saudi Arabia and the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries to cut the price of oil they produce to boost the global economy. Is that something that is possible?
Yes. I agree with his comment that it's the oil-producing countries that are restricting supply and determining the price. I mean, OPEC really came on the scene, so to speak, in 1973 with the so-called Arab oil embargo of 1973. There was a Middle East war, and the price of oil quadrupled overnight in 1973, then doubled again in 1979. And these are countries restricting supply, and prices are determined by supply and demand. And if you restrict supply at a given level of demand, the prices do go up. And it is the countries that determine the supply, in the Middle East, the large Middle East countries. And I think President Trump is correct that encouraging the Middle East countries to produce more oil would result in lower prices, and that would actually be stimulative, in my opinion, to the world economy.
Davos has really got two primary attendees, the wealthy and nation states. The wealthy seemed really, really happy with his remarks and where he was taking the U.S.
Yeah. Now certainly the U.S. economy, let's say, is doing very well right now. The financial markets are all pretty close to all-time highs. GDP is at a healthy growth rate, 2 to 3%. Unemployment is near historically low levels at 4.1%. I think the lowest level it's been in recent years, 3.4, so close to lowest levels in 50 years. The U.S. economy is actually leading the world, and there's no sign of a recession in sight. So I think President Trump has actually inherited a very strong economy, and certainly I'm sure would like to continue having the economy remain strong and grow faster. And yes, in terms of the wealthy benefiting from it, certainly those who have the wherewithal to invest, have financial assets. Financial assets is certainly growing and would provide a very healthy environment for business and investment.
All right. Well, we really appreciate your taking the time to explain all of this to us. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, you're very welcome. Happy to be here.
David Kass, a clinical professor of finance at the University of Maryland, Robert H. Smith School of Business.
Scotty had a lot of really interesting, honest perspectives on all of these major issues of what was a very big speech filled with a lot of information for the world and for the U.S.
And I think his main point, my main takeaway from what he said is economic policy is a two-edged sword. It's finding that balance. Mm-hmm. It's really hard. What's good for business may not be good for consumers and vice versa. So that is the balancing act that we're going to watch to see if it's performed well or it goes too far in one direction or the other.
Right. And he said, the Trump administration is starting off with a great economy. And, will he make that economy even better? We just have to watch and wait and see if these policies can actually make it grow further or what comes next.
Right now, everything you measure an economy by in the United States is top-notch. Employment levels are super low. Inflation is super low compared to the rest of the world. GDP
spending
is up. Consumer confidence is high. So if he can make it...
And the stock market, which is important,
and
President Trump definitely cares about that too.
And the stock market, really liked what they heard today because stocks went up.
You've been listening to The Issue from the Voice of America.
On behalf of everyone here at VOA, both here in Washington and all over the world, thank you so much for listening and being with us.
Absolutely. You can follow The Issue on X, Blue Sky, and Facebook at VOA The Issue. And for more news 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, check out our website at voanews.com.
In Washington, I'm Scott Walterman.
And I'm Lori London. We'll talk to you tomorrow.